Luis.
Luis, good to see you.
Gina.
I'm Gina. Nice
Hi,
to meet you.
Gina. And we've got Duolingo. Is that, did I
That's
pronounce
correct,
it properly?
Duolingo, yeah.
Duolingo.
Yeah.
Tell me about Duolingo.
All right, so I started Duolingo about 4 years ago.
Okay.
I had just sold my second company to Google,
Yeah.
and I wanted to work on something that was related to my passion, which is education.
Right.
Now, my views on education have always been very influenced by the fact that I'm from Guatemala, which is a very poor country. And now most people talk about education as being something that brings equality to different social classes, but I always saw it as the opposite, something that brings inequality. Because see, the people who have a lot of money can buy themselves the best education in the world, and because of that remain having a lot of money, whereas people who don't have very much money barely learn how to read and write, and because of that never end up making a lot of money.
That's certainly true when we're underfunding public education, but that's a whole nother topic. So go ahead.
So yeah, so I wanted to do something that would bring equal access to education to everybody.
Right.
Now, education is very general, so I decided to work on one type of education, which is learning a foreign language.
Yes.
It turns out there's 1.2 billion people in the world learning a foreign language. Now, it's a funny market. 800 million of these satisfy three properties. First, they're learning English.
Yeah.
Second, the reason they're learning English is in order to get a better job.
Right.
And third, they're of low socioeconomic condition.
Yeah.
So most people learning a foreign language are trying to learn English to get out of poverty.
Right.
But most of the ways there were to learn a language were very expensive. It cost like about $1,000. So the irony is that it seems it takes $1,000 to get out of poverty, which makes no sense. So I decided to make an app that would teach languages entirely free. Launched it about 3 years ago, and today is the most popular way to learn languages in the world.
This is great.
There are, in fact, more people learning a language on Duolingo in the United States than in the whole U.S. public school system.
No kidding.
In
Now
fact,
that shows there's a problem with the U.S. public school system. Teaching foreign languages, but that's okay. Go ahead.
in fact, there are over 100 million people learning languages with Duolingo all over the world. And we think there are three things that have made it grow so quickly. The first is that it's free.
Yeah.
The second is that it's made to look like a game. It really
Okay.
feels like a
Let
game.
me
So
take a look at it.
even people who are not interested in learning a language and kind of don't want to study end up doing this because it's a fun game.
Right.
And the third thing is that it's completely science-based. We really care about the rate at which people acquire information. And so we work on that every day. And there's a study conducted by the City University of New York that shows that 34 hours of Duolingo are equivalent to a full university semester of language education.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So if I really want to spruce up on my Spanish,
You should download Duolingo.
I've got to download Duolingo. Of course, right now I'm not allowed to have a smartphone, but that's a whole nother. Hello.
I'm Jewel.
How are you, Jewel?
I'm well.
Good to see you.
Happy
And
birthday.
Thank you so much. What's your name?
Jason Crane.
Jason.
Nice to meet you.
What do we got here?
So this is part pick. and
Part
we-
pick.
Yes, and we're making it super simple to find replacement parts.
For anything?
For anything eventually. We're starting out in the maintenance, repair, and operational space.
Okay.
So mostly fasteners like nails and bolts and screws and washers.
Right.
Yeah, and
In fact, I've been looking for this. Did you just take this?
we might have found it.
Did you
around.
take it out of the White House? Yeah. We got a loose bolt somewhere. No, I'm teasing. So how does this work? This is all operated out. It's an application off your smartphone.
Sure. So we created a technology, mobile specific, but we created an API that we allowed distributors, retailers to embed into their websites or into their mobile app very seamlessly. The application of it is very straightforward and simple. You take a picture of a part. We ask the user to take 2 images, and as you can see in the screen, after taking 2 images, we're able to give very detailed information about that part. Length, diameter, threads per inch, drive, grade, shape, even finish, part name, and part number.
All right, let's stop there for a second. Now, if I take a picture of my smartphone and I've got 2 parts. Let's say that it had the same head on this thing, because
Exactly.
this is a little different. The same head, but how is your program able to read the size just based on a picture?
Sure, so you touched on the reason why we started with fasteners in the first place. We want to get very good at distinguishing the differences between small details. The difference between this part and this part is less than an inch, right? So the technology that we built from scratch is based on computer vision, and what it does is it uses feature extraction to be able to look at the anatomy of that part, look at the specific details, the head, the grade, and use all of that information to build what we consider a digital fingerprint of that part, and use it to match to the best part in the database.
And we use a penny as a reference. So
Oh,
that,
I see. So
yep.
I see. That's what you do. You do the penny next to it. Okay, well, see there. That helped me figure things out. How did you guys get started in this? What's the background of the two of you, and how did you decide this was So it was a good business venture for you.
Yeah, so I was working in the parts industry,
Uh-huh.
managing a call center, and got all the escalations of the angry callers who we'd sent the wrong parts out to.
Right. They weren't happy.
They were not happy, so
Okay.
they were making my life a little
Right.
bit unhappy.
Right.
So wanted to help them out, and we actually came from the technology sector before that. So got together and decided to also join forces with PhDs from Georgia Tech.
Okay.
And so we are Howard and Morehouse grads, and wanted to build this out and make it work.
That's
Been
great.
working on it for about 2 years now. Just
So you've been at it for 2 years. How'd you finance the startup?
Great question. So we had
Yeah, I
a,
should ask you. That's always the main question there. It's like, where'd you get the money after you got the good idea?
so we were very diligent. It was a long road, but we just closed $1.5 million in seed funding just last month. And now we're looking to just penetrate the market and continue to increase revenue and grow sales.
And your business model is based on the idea that it's not just, you're not keeping an inventory of these parts. What you're doing is you're interacting, you've got a base of all the parts manufacturers and
Yep.
retailers, and they will all then start using your program so that people can easily
Yep, we're
order
just-
their parts online.
exactly charging them for the license of the API.
Got it.
They embed it in their mobile apps on their websites, and we charge them yearly for that.
Okay,
Yeah.
good to see you.
Happy birthday, sir.
Thank you. What's your name?
Tony Hittala.
Tony?
This is my co-founder, Billy.
Good to see you, Billy. So what do we got here?
Billy and I were both military officers. We met on a deployment. I'm in the Marine Corps. Billy was in the Navy.
You're still active, or?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic.
I'm separated from the Navy.
Okay.
And
So we got Andrews Air Force Base on here. Well,
Yes,
what-
sir.
What is it that I'm looking at here?
one of the issues that we found as we move from base to base, which most military members do, is sometimes government data is a little bit hard to find,
Yes.
including directory information. So what we did is we went through and we started pulling in information and making it a lot easier for people to find it. So each branch, each base would sometimes have different administrators that were doing it. They would use different formats. So we wanted to pull all that data in, standardize it, make one friendly user interface. So we kind of think of it as TripAdvisor, but for military bases.
Okay, so just to, so I'm stationed at Fort Bragg, and suddenly I get my papers. I'm transferring out. I move with my family. How does this app come into play?
This is the one place, this is one place where you can go and find all the information, no
Ahead of
matter
time.
ahead of time. Once you get there, 2 years on the base, you're trying to figure out what are the hours for, the fitness center, the medical center, that type of thing.
Right.
When Billy got out of the Navy, we'd been working with outside developers. We ended up sending them to a dev boot camp, which
Yeah, so I did a
Is that really
6-month full-time coding school, and neither of us had very little technical expertise
So
prior to.
you had the idea, but you guys weren't coders at the time.
Correct, and so the initial kind of prototype and first few iterations were outsourced in terms of the technology, and so we decided that in order to build a real business and a real product, we had to
You had to
bring
know a
that.
little bit about it.
Of course, and so now after that 6-month program, I was able to actually maintain it in-house, and so like all the entire new website and mobile apps are all maintained by us internally.
So I got all my stuff here. Cars and fuel, banks, barbershop.
Yep. And then here's an example of so at Andrews, the dental clinic. So you see the hours, you've got the phone numbers that you might need, a link to their website if that's if you're not finding what you need right here. They provide a lot of times amplifying information.
Well, this is hugely helpful. So the question then becomes, do you guys have a business model where you're going to have ads alongside this, like a lot of websites? Or is the Pentagon just going to say, we should have thought of this and buy the whole thing?
Well, right now we have a sponsorship model, so we have one large sponsor that has the military as their consumers, and they are happy to sponsor the resource. We also see that we've learned so much about directory management, which is kind of a boring topic, but
yeah.
something that a
That's
lot
a
of
big
people
deal.
need.
Right.
So it could be software as a service model.
Excellent. So if you're active duty right now, is he doing all the work?
He is, actually.
Wow.
We talk about the ideas, and then Billy runs the day-to-day operations, and in my off-duty time, I get to think and work on it.
Congratulations.
Thank
Well,
you,
very proud of you, and thank you both for your service. Come on, let's get a good picture.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, we got to get the base directory in the back there, a little free advertising. Come on. Fantastic.
Thank you,
Really
sir.
proud of you. Thank you. Thank you. Where'd you get the coding training?
Denver, Colorado.
Was it in like at a community college, or was it?
No, it was through a 6-month full-time coding boot camp.
The,
Galvanize and Turing.
Okay. Did post on the go cover?
No, our company paid for it.
Great, very good. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
What's your name?
I'm Zach.
Hey, Zach.
I am Fadil.
Good to see you, Fadil.
You too.
Dina.
Nice to see you. So what do we got here?
Let's see. So we are presenting Emerald, the
Uh-huh.
health companion for older people. It
Fantastic.
helps people stay safe and healthy in their homes.
Okay.
So I'm sure you have seen commercials with
Yeah, you got
a fallen.
you're wearing a necklace, or
Yeah,
you got a,
Exactly, and
I-
you push a button.
right. My grandmother lived by herself, so this was always something we were worried about.
Okay, yeah, so also father's grandma, my mom, and all of those people. So basically, one of the major problem is that we know that for older people, it's very hard to remember to put the pendant on
Right.
themselves, and even when they have it on themselves,
Right.
they don't remember to push
Right.
the button.
Or
So-
they're just cranky about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Be
so-
like, I don't want to wear this thing. Ah.
So we want a device that everyone can use.
Yeah.
People who don't know anything about technology, and it doesn't have anything on the body, no sensors on the body. So our device is over there. It's a device that you put in the home, much more like a Wi-Fi router, and it uses the ambient wireless signals to detect falls.
That's interesting.
Right?
Okay.
So Father is going to help me demo
Don't
this
fall
to
too
you.
hard.
I won't.
Okay.
Okay. So if you look at that red dot over
Yeah,
there, so
right.
you see that it's tracking
He's
Father's
just-
motion.
right, he's just walking.
Yeah.
Got it.
So now he walks forward, it tracks him.
Yeah.
If he goes to the side, it tracks
Yeah.
him too.
It's all good so far.
Okay, so far. Now he's
Yeah.
gonna fall. Hold on, can you fall?
Oh,
So
goodness.
look at the blue line.
Yeah.
It detected his elevation going to the floor
And
level
it triggers a fall.
and chin and a fall. And there is nothing on his body, all based on wireless signals in the environment.
Interesting. And so the sensors are installed in every room?
No, actually, you don't need to. It's just one sensor you can use for a small apartment.
For a small
or if you have, like your
This
house
is a
here.
pretty big place.
Yeah.
But, presumably.
But presumably you don't need this
Yeah.
here, but if somebody has a larger home, they can use multiple devices at
Uh-huh.
the same time.
Okay.
So it works together.
And then if a fall is triggered, it is sent to
It's,
some central
yeah,
place.
exactly. It
And
triggers
somebody calls, it's sort of like a
very
house
much.
alarm.
First, it goes to the caregiver, and if the caregiver does not confirm in 3 minutes, it just calls an ambulance.
Got it.
Yeah, but that's not the only cool thing.
Okay, there's more.
Yeah, there's more. We
That was
can-
pretty cool. But, okay.
That was cool enough, but
Yeah.
this is even cooler.
Okay.
We can monitor his breathing and heart rate without any sensor on his body from distance. So, for example, here the device is monitoring his breathing. You see the inhale, exhale motion of his chest. Inhaling, exhaling. So, Father, can you hold your breath, please? Now you can see that the signal is a steady level.
Wow.
And actually, do you know what this is? Sorry, I'm a professor, so I ask questions all the time.
This is a Socratic method here.
So these small blips, they
Yeah.
are his heartbeats.
The,
Dina, he's got
Now,
you.
yeah, can you breathe again, please?
yeah,
Sorry, we forgot about you.
thank you. Poor guy's like, he was really getting starting to turn blue. The part about the falling I understand, because those are sort of big motor movements that are taking place. I'm surprised that you've got a sensor that is that sensitive from that distance, that
Yeah, so,
is reliable enough to give meaningful data.
yeah, it's actually wireless signals, radio signals are amazing
Yeah.
creatures. They just, like, if you understand them enough, you know how to manipulate them. They can capture very minute motions, even including our heartbeats.
Good. Well, that's remarkable. So how did you guys, presumably this potentially then is also an application for babies monitors, for example.
Yeah. For example,
For example.
for SIDS, for babies,
For SIDS,
of course,
yeah.
yeah.
Just for paranoid type A parents, like me. What are your guys' backgrounds and how did you develop
So
it?
we are all from MIT. I'm professor at MIT. Father and Zach are my graduate students, but originally I'm from Syria.
Yeah.
Father is originally from Lebanon. Zach.
Potomac, Maryland.
Potomac, how boring. Yeah, well, this is excellent. How you doing?
Nice to meet you, Mr.
Good to
President.
see you.
Nice to meet you, Mr. President.
What's your name?
I'm Aaron.
Aaron?
I'm Hannah.
Hannah, this is so fun.
This is Jerry the Bear.
This is Jerry the Bear. Okay. So what's Jerry the Bear doing?
So we make healthcare education really fun for kids.
Yeah.
As you know, we have all these very large healthcare problems like type 2 diabetes, obesity.
I'm married to Michelle Obama. Come
You
on.
know it.
I'm all about healthy eating and exercise and all that stuff.
So we want to make it really fun really early on for kids.
Right.
So Jerry teaches kids about nutrition, exercise, sleep, and mindfulness. He does it in really fun ways.
Okay.
But we really started this actually out of personal passion and started in a very particular area, type 1 diabetes. So when I was a kid, I was human growth hormone deficient. My body didn't produce hormone I needed to grow, so I was much shorter. So I self-administered injections every day, and it gave me a great deal of empathy for what children go through, particularly those who are chronically ill.
Right.
For me, both of my grandparents have type 2 diabetes, and they passed away from the complications behind it.
Right.
Also, my dad was diagnosed with type 2 when he was about 45 years old.
Right.
Just saw him just changing his whole lifestyle, and we all also, as a family members, had to change our lifestyle to support his healthy eating and exercise. Just learn a ton and how stressful that could be, and also learn this empathy to help other people too. So Jerry was a perfect project for me to work on.
Excellent.
And so we actually, the idea came, we were interviewing families with type 1 diabetes, and we saw something really cool. All the kids were taking their stuffed animals and playing doctor. They would make their own little insulin pens and pretend to inject their bears.
Right.
They were doing everything they weren't allowed to do to themselves.
Right.
So we wanted to bring that to life. We wanted to do it in a way that was educational, but also fun and comforting, because learning about these things shouldn't be scary. And what kind of the research shows is that when stress is reduced in the home, it leads to much better outcomes later on. And play is how kids learn. 4 to 9 is this really magical window when they're still forming behaviors, they're forming their habits, and setting them up for healthy habits. So Hannah can show you how it works.
So this bear is specifically for kids with type 1 diabetes.
Right.
So to see how he's feeling, you press his finger.
I feel great.
So it feels pretty good.
Okay.
And what you do is you can feed him and give him insulin. So what we do is, because the age that we are target, kids are really young. Carb counting is very complex math for little kids. So we made it really visual. So every 1 dot is 5 carbs. For 1 dot of food, you need 1 dot of insulin. So to feed a cracker, you just swipe the food across his mouth.
There you go.
Makes a plate. It says 5 carbs. That's a snack.
Thanks.
And now we have to give him insulin. So what we do, because we gave him 1 dot of food, we need 1 dot of insulin. So I'll tap the pen on one of his sites. And now we can match it, so I'm going to give him 1 dot of insulin.
Thanks.
And then Jerry, beyond this, has 21 animated storybooks of Jerry training for the Olympics game.
well,
Because
there
this
you
is a bear training for the Olympics game, he has to learn climbing, diving with the sharks, and different stories.
We have fun sports.
Fun sports. So we want to make sure that learning health is not a very scary thing. It's through storytelling, so that's really a core part of our curriculum. And we work with parents, educators, and nurses so that it's understandable for both parties. And Jerry's nutrition education has been recognized as the gold standard of
That's great.
education.
Hi.
How are you? Happy birthday.
Thank you so much. What's your name?
Ramona Pearson.
Hey, Ramona. What do we got here?
Well-
Other than a picture of a very handsome guy.
Yeah, I was at your inauguration. I was very proud to be there.
Thank you. So what do we got?
So what we're doing is solving that problem, the
Oh.
issue of data. So, and content is data. So
Right.
what we saw is that 30% of the knowledge workers are trying to find content and experts to help them solve their problems in learning. And so what we realized is that we needed to really focus on that. So when you're a knowledge worker, you use Google, you search, or some other search platform, you grab the URLs to get into an email, send it back and forth, and then you lose that conversation. So we sought out and solved that problem. We said, what if there's one place where a knowledge worker can grab content, put it into one space, be able to share it and be able to have people on one platform and get smarter and smarter together. And so what we ended up doing is creating a knowledge innovation platform. So we're able to help surface the content and experts that are otherwise hidden from anywhere in the world. And so our big data algorithms are constantly pulling in all of the content in the World Wide Web and even pulling in government content. So the CDC, NIH, and other kinds of content so that knowledge workers who are trying to invent new things or solve big real world problems can get access to experts and information.
So let's take a concrete example.
Exactly.
I am somebody who works in a company, and I've got to figure out everything there is to know about rock guitars because we're selling them, or we're doing this, or we're that. So are you creating a place where I can collate all that information more rapidly than I could just doing a Google search? Or
Yes, absolutely. So Google, if
Or
anybody's a
any.
Google person,
No,
it's
we're using that.
yeah.
It could have been Yahoo.
Yeah,
Or,
yeah.
yeah, I'm not trying to preference anybody.
Right,
here, but-
but these technologies and searches are 25 years old now.
Right.
And they're also really good at getting you to buy ads.
Right.
And that's how they make money. But we're a knowledge platform that really helps people rapidly get to the knowledge and to be able to share it and to access that knowledge. So, for instance, if you are trying to build new policy, it would be very powerful and quick for you to be able to share some information out, create a collection, and have people who are doing research create a collection that you can look over and see. And then people can insight, and I'll show you what that looks like, create insights and be able to, contextualize information.
So rather than a search, I'm essentially setting up, or somebody will have set up already, some sort of place, some
Yes.
page where I can go to that's already gathered up a whole bunch of stuff without me having to search individually for each article.
So, for instance, this is me. So if I'm in the platform, these are articles that are leveraging predictive analytics. So we're a big data company, and what we're doing is actually building a cognitive graph on people.
Okay, what do we got going here?
Sounds data.
Okay.
Sector 3 is building very high energy density, very safe, and low cost. We tried to solve the riddle of how do you get to a very, very high energy density battery cell, but still make it on a very scalable platform. And we did the math. So we're simulations people by origin, and so we started doing some simulations and multi-physics calculations and determined that we believe the best way was to have it all solid state, no liquid electrolyte. And so we started making batteries on equipment that we bought on eBay that was very cheap, that was used to make things like food packaging. And last summer we demonstrated over 1,100 watt-hour per liter, which is about double what's available right now in the marketplace.
Yeah, Vino told me about this.
Okay.
See, I just saw Coastal Adventures. So.
Yep. Vinod did our series. A.
Yeah, I know. So,
Everybody get a picture of the President of the United States with our battery.
there you go. I promise you. They take a bunch of pictures, don't worry. This particular battery technology applications for everything from cars to devices to
That's
you
right.
name it.
Yeah, we just had an investment from Dyson, and so we will first put our batteries into their products, vacuum cleaners and consumer electronics and so forth. And after that, the sky's the limit. The reason we started the company was to get into electric vehicles. That's been a passion of ours
Right.
for a long time.
How do we cut the cost and the
Exactly.
size and
Exactly.
longevity of these
Exactly.
batteries? That's our big stumbling block to driving down the price point
Yep.
on electric cars.
Yep.
So have you solved it?
We believe so.
Okay.
We have to scale it up,
Right.
and, but this was after working on the incumbent technology for a long time. My team and I came from the University of Michigan. I was a professor there for 17 years, and so it came out of my laboratory. And a surprising thing happened. The first little prototypes we made at U of M worked, and that was based on NSF funding. So we decided to start a company, and we've been on this journey.
That's great. And what are the barriers to scaling up? What are the things you still have to figure out in terms of being able to, you know, for this to then become the standard bearer for batteries?
The usual engineering work. Every time you make a larger cell, you deal with the flaws, you have to make them faster, you get bigger and bigger equipment, pieces of equipment, you make them at a higher rate, and so we go through all those development steps, then you have to stop and test, and then you build again and stop and test. So.
Excellent. Well, I'm very excited.
Thank
Let's
you.
get a picture. Come on. Where, right here. Look at this guy. Lawrence, but are you getting the, okay, just want to make sure. Because you could tell I was in trouble if when I picked up the battery.
I had to get one of those. Thank you. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Good work. Hi.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. What's your name?
Tony, how you doing?
Hey, Tony. What you got here?
So our-
Student Loan Genius.
Student Loan Genius, that's our company.
This is going to tell me exactly where I can get my cheapest student loans.
That's part of it.
That's
So
only part of it.
what we invented is a 401k for student loans.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So we allow great companies to help their employees find the best repayment plan, and then the company can provide a matching contribution, just like they would for 401k, to help the employee become debt-free faster.
Oh, that's interesting. So let me think about this. So I graduate.
Yep.
And I go work for Shopkey 3.
Yep, that's right.
And but my parents didn't pay for my college, so I've got $50,000 worth of debt.
That's right.
So if Shakti was one of your customers,
What would happen?
what am I doing? I go to HR and they say, do you have any student debt? And they say yes, and then,
That's right. So there's three things that we do. The first thing that an employee would do is they would use our tool that we built. That's similar to TurboTax, but for student loans. So
Okay.
I know you came out of school with over $100,000 in debt, so did I. And you're pulling out loans each semester you're in school. So for most people, it's very confusing to figure out which programs they are eligible for. So what our tool does is it analyzes your loans. We built an algorithm to show you every single repayment plan that you specifically qualify for, right? And so we allow you to see them side by side, how it's going to affect you right now, but also in the future. And then once you choose a plan, we help you fill out the application. If you want to do refinancing, we help you fill out that process. But another really cool thing that you can see is that you can see the impact of your company providing that contribution. So once you choose a plan, we then integrate with the company's payroll system to start pulling money straight out of their paychecks and sending it off to Navient or Sally Mae or Great Lakes, whoever it is. And then if the company wants to, they can provide that match on top of that.
that's smart.
So we're having a massive impact on people's lives. You can see here the average impact that we can have on people if a company's providing a $25 or $100 match.
Is this a one-time purchase by the company, or are you managing this and
Yeah.
it's like a monthly service?
It's a monthly service. So the company can decide if they want to provide monthly matching contributions, or they can do like annual cliffs. So after you're here for 12 months, then we'll give you like $5,000. And with our payment system, we ensure that the money goes to the highest interest loan, straight to principal, to ensure that the loans are getting paid off efficiently.
Now, given the algorithm you already developed, though, why just do a sale to business? Because the concept presumably would apply to somebody who is self-employed or anybody, so you could go direct to consumer on this, couldn't you?
Yeah, great point. So the reason that we want to go straight to B2B at this point is because you get a match, right, from the employer, right? So that's a huge incentive for a company to use as a recruiting and retention tool.
No, it's
Right.
very smart. I mean, this part, but I guess once you have this established,
Then we are going to go roll out to B2C. We're actually launching with our first university this month, Northeastern University. It's going to open it up to all their alumni. So they're not going to receive the match, but they actually can use our
but
platform.
they can still use it to
Exactly.
make calculations quickly.
And actually, 4 out of 5 people who use our tool are choosing to switch plans that they're currently on, taking advantage of payee or income, like based plans or
Yeah.
income contingent.
Excellent.
So it's like people want this, it just needs to be put in front of them.
And are you plugging in things like the income-based repayment program and things?
Absolutely, this is all here.
Okay.
So here you can see the standard
Yeah.
consolidation, graduated, income base, income contingent, and
So you
paid.
can make a bunch of decisions.
Absolutely.
How'd you get this idea, other than having a lot of debt?
Yeah, so before this company, actually, I started the first financial planning company for millennials. So working with people in their 20s and 30s. And it was through that company where I saw student loans were just impacting people's lives.
Right.
And I just had the idea that, companies are helping, people save for retirement, but our generation is getting crushed by student loans. So wouldn't it be cool if companies provided those matching dollars, but for something that we actually care about that's really having an impact on our life?
How'd you finance?
So we've actually just closed a seed round that was led by one of the biggest financial services companies in the country that we can't announce until later this month.
I won't say anything. Quiet.
But we are always looking for strategic partners and investors. So I just want to throw that out there.
All right. Well, congratulations. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Have a seat. Have a seat. Look at you guys with all your gadgets. Sit down. Come on. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm so gray. But I feel good otherwise. Welcome to the White House, everybody. As a birthday treat to me, I thought I'd invite business leaders, investors, and government officials here for the first ever White House Demo Day. Yes. I think it's fair to say that when I was 8, I would have been confused by that choice. But now I think it's really cool. And I am so grateful to have all of you participating. On a typical demo day, entrepreneurs, like many of you, pitch your ideas to potential investors in venture capital or elsewhere. And it is a high-stress, make-or-break moment. It can change the course of your life. Folks are peppering you with questions. You don't know what's going to be coming. Today was much more relaxed because you just had to pitch the President of the United States with your ideas. So, yes, no problem. In front of TV cameras that everybody's going to watch. Fortunately, everybody did a stellar job that I had a chance to meet. And here in this room, we've got some of the best and brightest entrepreneurs America has to offer. Folks from all across the country who are working every day to transform the way we live and learn and communicate. They have taken over my house. We've got people who are developing the next generation of lithium-ion batteries, a system of radio sensors that notices when a senior takes a fall while they're in their home, a robotic teddy bear that helps kids with diabetes learn about managing their health and staying active. There was an app that helps military families transition to their new communities. Another app that helps you order replacement parts just by snapping a photo of the old one. And then there are the folks at Astrobotics Technology in Pittsburgh. They are shooting for the moon, literally, with plans to land a rover on the lunar surface in the next couple of years, which is pretty exciting. I wouldn't mind, seeing how that turns out. In America, that's who we've always been. We explore next frontiers. We're pioneers with a vision for tomorrow, whether it's Lewis and Clark, Sally Ride. We're the nation of Franklin and Edison and Carver and Salk, Jobs, Gates. And the folks here today are heirs to that legacy. And they are the driving force in a 21st century economy. Startups, young firms, account for almost 40% of new hires. And as we fought back from the worst economic crisis of our lifetimes, those firms have helped our private sector create more than 12.8 million jobs over the last 64 straight months, which is the longest streak of private sector job growth on record. So, as president, I've worked to make it easier for entrepreneurs to strike out on their own. We've made it easier for folks to buy health insurance, making it portable so you can strike out and do your thing. We've made it easier to pay off student loan debt. although there was an app that I just saw of somebody who's really good at working with businesses to help manage student loan debt in an efficient way. We have tried to download government data sets for new apps and innovations, following in the path of the National Weather Service and other data that's turned into commercial ventures. We've worked to connect to high-speed broadband and open access for free and open internet. And we're working on trade agreements to open up new markets for companies to sell their products overseas. Thanks to the Bipartisan Jobs Act that I signed, it's easier for innovative companies to take the next step and go public. And when it's fully implemented, more startups and small businesses will be able to accept support from regular investors through crowdfunding. So today, America is home to more high-tech companies than any place else in the world. And business leaders have declared that China is no longer the world's #1 place to invest, America is. With technological advancements like cloud computing and big data and 3D printing, the fact is there's never been a better time to launch an idea and bring it to scale right here in the United States right now. But we've got to make sure that we're taking full advantage of this moment by tapping all the talent America has to offer, no matter who they are or where they set up shop. And obviously there are chronic challenges for any entrepreneur. Capital's tough to come by, but it's even tougher if you're not in one of a handful of cities that have a well-developed venture capital presence. It's always hard to get in front of the right people, but sometimes it's harder if you're a woman or an underrepresented minority who all too often have to fight just to get a seat at the table. Right now, one study shows that fewer than 3% of venture capital-backed companies have a woman as their CEO. Another study showed that fewer than 1% have an African-American founder. Yet we've seen again and again that companies with diverse leadership often outperform those that don't. That's the market that is out there, not just here in the United States, but globally. So that lack of participation from everybody isn't good for business. We've got to make sure that everybody's getting a fair shot. The next Steve Jobs might be named Stephanie or Esteban. They might never set foot in Silicon Valley. We've got to unleash the full potential of every American, not leave more than half the team on the bench. And that's something a growing number of tech companies have begun to recognize. So in January, Intel announced that by 2020 they would achieve full representation of women and minorities in their US workforce. Last week, Pinterest also announced ambitious new diversity goals of their own. Today, we've got a series of public and private commitments to build on those efforts. We've got more than 40 leading venture capital firms who are pledging to do more to track and hire and support women and underrepresented minorities and veterans at their firms and portfolio companies. A pair of leading pension funds are committing to diversifying the ranks of those who manage their money. We've got companies like Xerox, Box, and others that are going to institute their own version of the NFL's Rooney Rule, named after my good friend Dan Rooney of the Pittsburgh Steelers, which means interviewing at least one woman and one person of color for every senior position, just so that folks get a chance to get in the door. And more than 100 deans at America's engineering schools are committing to recruit and retain more diverse student bodies, building the pipeline for the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs, because this is something we are seeing again and again and again. We are not producing all the technical talent, all the engineers that we need. And part of the reason is because too many girls and too many young people of color are getting intimidated and winnowed out of the process, not being mentored, not being encouraged, and we deprive ourselves of the talent that we need in order for us to continue to be a dynamic, innovative economy, because that's the part of the population that's growing. So my administration is also going to do our part. We're expanding our Tech Hire initiative to 10 new cities and states, bringing together employers and local governments to create newer, faster training pathways like coding boot camps so that a more diverse group of workers can get hired and perhaps eventually start a business of their own. We're scaling up the National Science Foundation's successful Innovation Core program at 6 more federal agencies so we can help more of our scientists move their ideas out of the lab and into the marketplace. More than 50 new cities have signed up to our Startup in a Day initiative. Many of them have earned cash prizes from the Small Business Administration to help them clear away all the red tape so that a local entrepreneur can apply for all the licenses and permits that they need to start a business in just one day. So we hope that these efforts are going to open up new opportunities for all of our entrepreneurs, all of our would-be entrepreneurs. And in the months ahead, I look forward to seeing more folks across this country, investors, accelerators, universities, civic leaders, corporate giants, growing startups, all take new steps to build on these actions. Because you never know who's going to have the next big idea or what path will lead them there. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples because these are folks who are here. Take the story of Ramona Pearson. Where's Ramona? Right there, Ramona's right back here. So I was just talking to Ramona. This is a pretty remarkable story. Back in 1984, when she was 22 years old, Ramona had already been a U.S. Marine. She was a young, dedicated, highly skilled professional in the prime of her life. One day, she's out for a run, and she was hit by a drunk driver. And she was in a coma for 18 months. Woke up 18 months later, weighed 64 pounds, was bald and was blind, could not walk, could not speak, was moved into a nursing home. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people would be broken by that. In that nursing home, Ramona was surrounded by dozens of senior citizens, folks with a lifetime of knowledge and expertise and skills of their own as parents and teachers and community leaders, and they helped coach Ramona back to health. They became her mentors, and over the next few years, Ramona had to relearn the most basic skills, walking, speaking, crossing the street, and she gained the perspective of others with challenges. And decades later now, Ramona looks back on that process of learning by connecting with others as the catalyst for a startup she launched 3 years ago called Declara, and it's a technology platform that combines the power of a search engine with a worldwide network of experts so that we can all learn things faster from our fellow citizens and their lifetimes of knowledge. It's sort of like a Google meets Facebook, but there's all kinds of stuff to it. Ramona was explaining it to me, and it was fascinating, and I understood about half of it. So today, Declara has users all around the world. It's attracted millions of dollars of capital. They've got a team of 65 employees, with women serving as CEO, COO, and head of data sciences. That's the power of a good idea. And when Ramona was in that nursing home, I don't think anybody would have imagined that she was going to be a candidate to be a significant tech entrepreneur. Ideas can come from anybody and anywhere and can be inspired by any kind of life experience. And we've got to judge those ideas on their merits. We've got to make sure they're not filtered by misperceptions about who people are or who's capable of dreaming something up. And that's at the very heart of America, the idea that any of us can make it if we try. And together, if we have enough effort and enough urgency, our idea can move the world. We can all be a part of making sure everybody has that chance. And that's what the demo day is about here today. That's what our initiatives are about. That's what our outstanding 40 partners that are making announcements are all about here today. I'm very proud of them, and I can't wait to see what all of you end up doing. All right? And you know, keep in mind that in about 18 months I'm going to need a job. So, you know, I got some skills. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.